The alarm goes off so I can get up and get out and go photograph sunrise, and I'm out for a few hours and come back to the campsite with the car, and they're like sitting in one of the camp chairs huddled under a blanket because it's frigid cold, and the fire was smoldering because all the wood was wet, so they couldn't get a fire going. And I was like, oh, like this isn't how this goes anymore.
Well, hey everyone, welcome to episode 378 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week I sat down with John Putnam, a photographer most well known for his work in Acadia National Park. John comes highly recommended to the podcast by several former guests and many listeners, so I was very happy to finally get to speak with him. I absolutely loved our conversation, and I think you will too. This week's podcast is brought to you by Nature Photographers Network. NPN is my go-to source for nature photography inspiration. I love the critique forums as it is a great way to learn how others see photographs. I'm inspired not only by looking at other people's images, but also by critiquing them when I can. There's something impactful about the exchange of opinions for our artwork that I personally love, and NPN makes it easy to do that with great rules and guardrails in place. There's no tolerance for trolls, and it's a very, very friendly place, unlike Facebook. Annual membership is just $49 per year, and I'd highly recommend subscribing to their amazing magazine as well, Nature Vision Magazine. It's full of amazing inspiration that will surely help you on this journey. Be sure to use the code FSTOP10 for a discount. Just go to npn.link/FSTOP to learn more. Okay, let's get to this week's conversation with John Putnam.
All right. John Putnam, it's great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be on. Nice to see you, Matt.
Yeah, you too. You have a lot of fans out there. I had Debbie White, who's a listener, beg me to get you on the podcast. Our mutual friend, Ben Williamson, wants you to come on the show. So you have a lot of friends and followers that want to hear you talk about your journey.
Yeah, well, no, I'm glad you mentioned both of them, and you know, Deb especially. I think she was the one who connected us by email, and which was, I mean, it was like a couple years ago at this point,
right?
Which is my fault. That's on me. I mean, you reached out to me right away, but I dragged my heels on this. So,
right. No, you've been busy. You just had a newborn not too long ago.
It should be one very soon. Yep. And
well, there you go.
Yeah, but I also have another one that'll be 6 very soon. So, yeah, between the two of them, they keep me busy.
Absolutely. I remember those days fondly and not fondly.
Yeah. No, it wasn't all good.
Well, the sleep thing is the hard part.
Yes. Yeah, the sleep thing. We're doing a lot of the sleep thing these days.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. I just got home from a workshop in Death Valley, and one of our students did a workshop with you and Ben a couple years ago, Dana, and he had really great things to say about both you and Ben. So we have that connection in common now too.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, he was just with us, if I'm thinking of the right person, just this past winter. Does that sound right?
I think so. Yeah.
Like a month ago, yeah.
Yeah, I misspoke, but yeah, he was a really nice guy, and he had nothing but good things to say about you. So
yeah, he was a pleasure to have along. Yeah.
Well, John, for people who aren't familiar with you and your photography, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, my name's John Putnam. I live in Maine. I live on Mount Desert Island in Maine, which is home to Acadia National Park, or most of it anyway. Live here with my wife and 2 children, who are both pretty young, as we spoke about. And, I have a gallery of my own work here in Southwest Harbor where I live. And of course, I lead workshops in Acadia and outside of Acadia, and a lot of private, one-on-one photography tours here in the park. I mean, it's, this whole thing, everything I just mentioned is, in the grand scheme of things, pretty new to me. I've only been living here about 8 years, and, my oldest is about to turn 6, as I mentioned, and the business, the gallery, the workshops, all of that started within that time. I moved here expecting or hoping to do exactly that. That was the plan. And, I feel very lucky that I was able to accomplish all of those things in this amount of time. It was a lot of work, but got here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think some people greatly underestimate the amount of work that goes into trying to scrape together something that makes sense to be able to be a full-time photographer. I mean, it's just funny, the things that some people have to do in order to just put food on the table. You know what I mean? It's wild.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest, when I conceived of this plan. My wife and I, we were living in New York City. I was there for about 9 years, and both of us had, good jobs. We were both successful and, good living situation, everything like that. But at some point decided to just drop everything and start over. And we, this was years out from it actually happening, but that's basically what we did. We just dropped everything, and we moved to a place we'd never lived and knew little about, and started over. And I mean, props to my wife, Allison, who, was game for this, and it really was, a lot of it hinged on her. So she's a teacher and music teacher, and wherever we were going to move to, she had to get work first. That was how we were going to do it. And then, from there, I would hopefully build this business around wherever we were. And happily, it's here in Maine.
So why Maine? What was it about Maine that made you decide to leave New York City and all of the success behind?
Well, there's a long story that I've told many times that led us here, which I'll probably skip today. But, the essence of it is, we wanted to live somewhere where we could go hiking every day if we wanted to. We wanted, a yard, something as simple as that. And, New York is amazing. It is amazing. And there's a lot I miss about it. But it wasn't for us. And we knew that. We knew what we wanted, and we wanted to go and find that. We found it here. So, yeah, a lot of outdoor opportunities here. We were able to, purchase a home and have some property, which is huge. And, for me, knowing that I wanted to do what I do, I needed to be in a place like this. I needed to be in a place that had the landscapes and had the tourism, and this checked all of those boxes. We almost moved to Washington State, like that was the plan for a little while, but a couple unexpected twists and turns in life, and ended up here. But I think that it worked out really well for us.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just got done reading Colleen Minnick's new book, which hasn't come out yet because she's going to come on the podcast and talk about it. And it was really insightful because I know she spends a lot of time up in your neck of the woods as well. And in her book, she talks about how society has driven us all to become successful, right? And most people think success looks like having 3 cars and living in a big house and having lots of possessions. And she finally came to the realization in her 40s that for her, success meant having the freedom to be outside and spending time in nature and having connections with the people that she loves. And so I'm guessing that your move to Maine was a little bit in that same vein in terms of finding out about what really matters to you and your wife most.
Yeah. And, I don't think we knew that at the time in moving here. We didn't have that answer, of course, that came later. And I think we have it now. But we were certainly searching for that. And, I think, what that led us to are the experiences we're having now that we have children and we're settled here and we, have a community around us. I think we definitely found that. And I get that about what, Colleen is saying. It was so easy in a way when we were in New York. There were just so many opportunities there. And we very easily could have just stayed and, kept on that path and kept living that lifestyle. And I say we weren't living in a penthouse or anything like that. It was not that type of lifestyle, but we had a certain amount of freedom there. But even that, I think, became, mundane for some reason. And we just needed more than that, more than a place like that could provide us. Like I said earlier, it wasn't for us. We needed something different. And this, Southwest Harbor, Maine, is very different.
I was going to say, that's like about as opposite as you can get.
Yeah. It approaches it.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about the time you spent in New York City, and I know you had a career there as a photographer, working for publishing companies and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And from what I understand, when you were working as a photographer full-time, you would spend all of your vacation time on trying to get to locations and destinations for your landscape photography pursuits. I'd love for you to hear you talk a little bit about that dynamic of kind of constantly feeling like you're at work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to be honest, it didn't feel like that. So, the professional side of my photography back then, it was part-time. I had a day job that had nothing to do with photography, and I was photographing for these publishing houses as in pursuit of maybe a career in photography. I knew that I was interested in photography, and this was an opportunity for me to pursue that. Of the projects were had little to do with my own personal photography. They weren't mine. I have my name in a lot of books. I have my name on and in quite a few books, but very, very few of that was personal photography. Most of it was like filling in the blanks. They'd get a book, they'd have an author, and they'd have most of the illustrations they needed, but maybe it would have a couple little gaps in it. And so then they'd call me up and I'd fill in the gaps. But here and there, I had the opportunities to do all of the photography for a book, or most of it. And a couple of the projects felt personal. But again, for the most part, they weren't. So when I did get the chance to travel, that was my opportunity to pursue the type of photography I really loved, which was nature photography. So, most of my travels, it was both of us. It was Allison and myself, and, together. And, so we would pursue these things that we both had interest in. For me, it was photography. And for both of us, it was, backpacking, camping, that sort of travel. And so every trip was based around that. And she was extremely patient because she knew that, nature photography was my passion. So, she was fine with that being a big part of those vacations. It was all part of the experience. And yeah, but then when I would, get back to New York, I wouldn't have as many opportunities to, express myself in that way. I found certain locations, certain places I could go and do photography that felt like nature photography. Where I worked was right on the Gowanus Canal, which is notorious. It's this horribly polluted canal. Used to be. Them working on that. It was all, old industry along there. I think it's all condos now. But, there was a lot of wildlife in the canal. So, my lunch breaks or after work, I'd go out there with the camera and see what I could find. And it, it felt like, almost like the anti-nature, or not even that, or just like part of the story, that I was missing when I was out in these pristine environments while on vacation. But yeah, it was very separate from what I was doing professionally. So it didn't feel like I was working all the time. The vacations felt like vacations. And when I came home and I had the chance to go through those images and post-process and all that, it didn't feel like work. It felt like part of just an extension of the vacation. So that was easy. That got a little more complicated once I started doing photography full time here in Maine. Then your hobby becomes your business as well. And finding a separation between the two got a little more complicated. But yeah, now in New York, it was easy. It was definitely a way out.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about that separation, because that's something I've been challenged with a little bit. Now that I'm doing full-time workshops with Munch workshops, I've found that strangely, it's a little bit more difficult to find the time to go do my own photography. It doesn't make sense, right? Like, oh, I'm going to have all this time, but you really don't. And of course, when you're out teaching workshops, you're kind of tapping into that same part of who you are. Like, you're expending that energy a little bit in terms of the creative. You're tapping to that creative potential that you have. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about what are some of the things that you've done to kind of help separate your work pursuits from your personal pursuits.
Yeah. So
I'm taking notes because I need to know how to do this.
Well, yeah, good. I'll try to explain this in detail then. And this is a topic that I've been thinking a lot about lately, especially in the last couple of years. And I've been exploring a lot of ideas to help with that. It was really difficult when I was first starting out here. So I think we moved to Maine in 2020, and it was a slow burn, but the business was up and running a year later, and eventually off to the races. But that I did get to that point where it was just constant photography. I was either out with clients, or I was out by myself doing personal work, or I was behind the computer doing post-processing. So it was just constant. And I was, I think, fine with that back then, but it began to get tiresome. But I wasn't in a place yet to really do anything about it, I didn't know how to kind of make any changes. And, I think what it took was children.
Yeah. Right. Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah. So, and you have kids.
I have one 16-year-old. So
okay.
Totally.
So I don't really have to explain this to you, but going under, maybe under the assumption that there's listeners who don't have kids that might eventually have children. I'll do my best here. And before I had kids, you'd hear about like kids are amazing, or having kids is amazing, or it's crazy or whatever. And that just doesn't communicate what it's like at all. It's for me, it's kind of like being on another planet, right? Like you grow up on Earth, and you go to school on Earth, and you get married on Earth, and then you have kids, and all of a sudden you're on a different planet. It's like starting over, right? You get to you see everything for the first time again. That's really it. Is you get to experience everything all over again through them, through their eyes, and that's the I think the part of like being a parent that I really connect with. But it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of time. When we moved to Maine, part of the deal was we were going to stop traveling for a while. Like that was the trade-off. We're quitting our jobs. We were starting over. We wanted to hold on to the money that we had, and traveling is a major expense. And so that was something we were going to cut out of our lives for a while. But then after we had our son, we started to kind of feel that itch again, and we were in a position that we could start to do some traveling. The first kind of trip that we all took together with our son, who wasn't quite a year old at the time, was to the Great Smoky Mountains for a week in April. So I mentioned my wife's a teacher, so she gets a week off in April. So we fly down there, and we were going to camp the whole time. So we get to camp, I set up camp, and then, sun's getting low, and I was like, all right, I'll be back, and grab the camera gear and jump in the car, and
that's what we do.
Yep, off to sunset, and left them back at the campground. And then, whatever, came back and did dinner and and everybody got in the tent and went to sleep. And then again, the next morning, the alarm goes off so I can get up and get out and go photograph sunrise. And I'm out for a few hours and come back to the campsite with the car. And they're like sitting in one of the camp chairs, huddled under a blanket because it's frigid cold. And the fire was smoldering because all the wood was wet, so they couldn't get a fire going. And I was like, oh, like this isn't how this goes anymore. Things are different now. And so that was kind of eye-opening on that trip, that these weren't like photo excursions anymore. This was a family vacation, Right. So I set photography aside as best I could, and just to try to focus on the trip as a family. But that was really difficult that first time. I wasn't used to that. I was used to just constantly doing photography. I did get out one other time that trip. We were all up. We were staying in the campground just outside of Cades Cove, and we were all up nice and early, and were able to get to the gate before it opened, and drive in and kind of be there for the light. And it was a beautiful morning. I think we were on Hyatt Lane, and I made this beautiful panorama of the road leading to the mountains. Very classic, but just perfect conditions for something like that. But they were with me. My wife and my son were with me, right next to me, and it just made it into that much more of an experience, like having them there, experiencing that with me, the sun coming up and lighting up that beautiful landscape. And, whenever I look at that image now, I can also see the snapshot I took with my phone of the two of them, in that same light, and, with big smiles on their faces because they were laughing. I don't remember about what, but coming home from that trip, I imagine I started kind of thinking about this then, like things are different now. How do I adapt my photography with, being, having a family? And, my photography as a business for me at that point, it was still pretty easy to be at home. I mean, I was out of the house a lot, but I was still home all the time. I had the gallery, and I was there, at least 6 days out of the week, but only 6 months out of the year, summer, fall. And during those same 6 months, I was busy leading, private tours. Living where I live, at the doorstep to a national park, my business was coming to me. I didn't have to leave home to pursue it. It was coming here. So that made things kind of easy, but it also made it easy to do photography all the time, nonstop, as we were talking about. What I think when it changed was maybe a couple years later. So that was when we all went to the Smokies together, 2019. So when I was down there on that trip, I conceived of this workshop that I wanted to run in the Great Smoky Mountains. And, while we were there, I was reminded of this event that happened in the Great Smoky Mountains every year at the end of May, beginning of June, when they have just this spectacular firefly show. And, the fireflies in general in that part of the country are incredible. But I think for the most part, when we picture fireflies, we picture meadows, things like that. But they have this species of firefly there called synchronous fireflies that live in the forests. And, it's so hard to explain what it's like. But as the name suggests, they all light up at the same time, or at least they sync their light so that eventually they are all blinking at the same time. And the forest is just filled with them.
Sounds amazing.
It's incredible. And, I'd heard about this the first couple summers. My wife and I were dating, we went down to the Smoky Mountains. And this was ages ago, and I remember hearing about it then. And when we went back with our son, I was reminded of it again. And I said, oh, yeah, I gotta go and see this. I went back a month later, 2019, went back a month later on my own to view it. And my timing was really good, and I was able to make some photographs and experience it. But that inspired me to put this workshop together. I would have begun running in 2020. Of course, that didn't work out, but I was down there and leading that workshop, and then every year since. I went down to do that. So me and my assistant, Nathaniel Child, go down there to run this together, and we drive, because we started doing this in 2021. There's no getting on a plane, right? So like, let's just drive down there. And, from Maine to the Great Smoky Mountains is a solid 2 days of driving. And, and then you get there, you need a couple days to scout, 5 days to run the workshop, a couple days after that for personal photography. And then a couple days driving back turns into a 2-week trip really fast.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of time to be away from, your family. And, for some reason in 2022, it just hit me. It hit me really hard. I was super homesick. I was like miserable the whole time. Not the whole time. I mean, the workshop went really well. It was very successful. But outside of that, when I was trying to do my own photography, just personal work, I just couldn't concentrate. And I was feeling really unsuccessful, and I didn't really make a lot of images. And went home feeling very frustrated. And it's funny, in kind of thinking about this now, the most successful images I made were of fireflies, and it was during the workshop, and it was when I was surrounded by people and completely distracted from, not being home, which makes a lot of sense. But, I've thought about that, I think, since just photography or workshops as a distraction, and just trying not to think of home when I'm away, which sounds really backwards, but I think works. You busy yourself, you busy your mind, and you don't have time to think about those things. And that year in the Smokies, I remember the worst part of the day was at night. The campfire would be out, and I'd be in my tent, and with nothing to distract me but my own thoughts. And that's when the homesickness was the worst. So I got back from that trip, and I was like totally discouraged, man. I was on, I say this, but, I was like considering like, well, obviously photography's not working. I was really, unsuccessful on this trip. I wasn't able to make images. What am I doing with my life? This isn't working. I need to figure something else out. So I had those thoughts. I mean, and they didn't last long, but they were there. And luckily, when I returned from that trip, it's off to the races for me. The summer season starts, and I don't really have time to think. And so I didn't. I jumped right into it, and got the gallery open, and leading tours and workshops. It was a crazy summer for that sort of thing. It was so busy. The fall was even busier. At the end of it, things slow down. Winter arrives, and like most of the people here where I live, winter's a time to kind of like breathe. A little and relax.
And now you're stuck in your own head.
Well, yeah, but it was like enough time had passed, I think, that, well, enough time had passed that I wasn't like having those awful thoughts of needing to quit photography or something. Instead, I'd been photographing that whole season, all summer and all fall, but I wasn't really concentrating on it. I wasn't going out, or rarely going out on my own. It was all when I was out with clients. And when I'm out with people, especially when it's one-on-one, like I have my camera out. If I'm not inspired by what's in front of me, like I can't expect the person that's with me to be inspired as well.
I'm the same way. Yeah.
So I'm photographing the whole time. But that year I wasn't paying it any attention. I was just like, I felt like I was kind of like going through the motions, setting up the camera, and, whatever, creating some images. And I didn't look at anything until winter came. And I was like, all right, I've got like thousands of images that I need to go through. So I have the time. Let's start doing this. And I started looking through my catalog, and like it was one after another just amazing image that I'd made. And I was like, but how? Like I wasn't even paying attention to what I was doing. And I remembered a lot of these moments, and I remembered being in front of them and saying, oh, this is cool, and snapping photos. But I hadn't put much thought into it at the time, and certainly since. And so I really had to like reflect on that a little bit. Like how did this happen? How was I able to achieve this? How did I make some of what at that point were my best images, compared to any year before it? And, I think at the end of the day, I concluded that I had just like kind of stopped caring, not like in a bad way, but it was more, I should say, I was like following my gut, right? Rather than trying to, create an image that told a story or chase my emotions, and like that's what I was doing that year in the Smokies, was chasing these sad emotions and trying to make images that echoed that, and it just wasn't fun and it didn't work. But I was following my gut, as reacting to moments, and just making these images, and they're really successful. And I think so. I think I just let go of that pressure and I think, a lot of us talk about this, that pressure of feeling the need to produce images. And I'd finally kind of figured out how to let that go. And what that resulted in was, one, a higher quality of work, a peace of mind. And then I was able to return home at the end of the day and not feel the need to get up and go out again the next morning. And that was very freeing. The fact that I didn't need to check, the cloud forecast for the next morning to see if it was going to be a good sunrise, or I didn't feel the need to go out and chase a weather event or something. I could just stay home if I wanted to. And that gave me a lot of time to be at home with family and spend more time with those kinds of experiences. That changed everything. It, like I said, brought me peace of mind, and then the peace of mind led to more successful image making, I think. Because now I can go out, or I can not go out to photograph, because I know that the next time I go out, I'll be able to create those images. I gained that confidence. And even if I go out the next time and I don't even take the camera out of the bag, I know that maybe the next time I go out, I'll make some great images. So yeah, that was a big part of like finding time, or getting time back, and creating a separation between kind of like personal work and professional work. Just releasing that pressure.
I love that. Yeah, it's interesting how, as photographers, how we have defined that word success. And I fell into that trap for years and years and years. And I watched workshop attendees do it too, where, success is getting the camera out, making a fantastic image, and editing it and getting likes and comments and all those things that come with making a great photograph. And it's interesting, as you were talking, I was like, because I've had some similar epiphanies myself, where for me, success is totally redefined. Success is like having that wisdom and experience to like feel okay with not getting the camera out, or like you're out somewhere photographing something and it's just not working. It's no big deal. Like you can do it again tomorrow, right? And I get it. Like if you have limited time in the field and maybe you only have a week of vacation where you can do photography, and like every single moment counts, and I get that mentality. But I think that mentality can also lead to all of these pressures on yourself, where you can feel down on yourself and down on the experience and down on everything else. And at the end of the day, it's like, how lucky are we to be able to even just spend this time in nature, experiencing these wonderful things, even if there's no clouds in the sky or the light's not working the way we want it to work or whatever it is. You know, I just did this workshop in Death Valley, and it was cool to see one of our attendees. We kind of had one of those moments where she wasn't feeling inspired by what was happening, but then she made the realization that it's fine. I can put the camera away and I can just experience this. So yeah, it was interesting seeing her have that realization that just because you're not feeling inspired to make a photograph, it's still success, right? You're still experiencing an awesome moment. You're actually gaining that wisdom that if you're not feeling it for whatever reason, that's no big deal. It's fine. You can learn from that experience and gain insight into yourself. Like, what inspires you, you know, like that is an important takeaway for any photographer, like understanding the types of scenes that speak to you versus the ones that don't, or the type of light or whatever, the subjects. So I think having those types of experiences and then reflecting on them and understanding why we felt the way we felt in the field, I think that's success for me anyway.
I agree. Yeah, I think I should say what we should be doing as photographers is, you know, rather than planning these trips based around, you know, specific photographic goals, whether you're going to a specific location or something like that to get this, you know, an image that maybe you have in mind. I think we should be planning experiences, and we should bring our camera along and, you know, see what unfolds. And, you know, I believe workshops can be that. And I think good workshops are that. It's more of an experience than a photography trip. And, you know, with, you know, a number of my workshops, of course, bring people to, you know, these classic locations that you would expect to see if you come to Acadia or if you go to the Great Smoky Mountains or what have you. Mm-hmm. But I also try to, you know, mix in locations that people wouldn't maybe find or go to on their own, that don't offer the same, I don't know, grandeur as others do, in the hopes that, you know, people will feel fresh inspiration or will have to work a little harder to find images. And, you know, I think in a lot of cases that has been really successful. You know, I think you run a few workshops, like multi-day group workshops in Acadia, but, you know, one of which, the workshop I've been running the longest, which I do in November, Icons of Acadia, you know, by the title, it suggests that we are going to go to those icons. And we do use that time for that because we have the park all to ourselves in November, so we can go to Bass Harbor Lighthouse and kind of take over, and we don't have to worry about anybody being in our way. You know, even in that workshop, I'll mix in some spots that people wouldn't find on their own. But then, you know, in October, so October is like, it's like workshop central here. You know, there's 2 weeks where there's tripods everywhere. And everybody, all the out-of-town workshops come here, and for good reason, because, you know, we get that fall color and we have the dramatic coastline and the combination of the two, and it's just spectacular. And so I held off for a really long time organizing a group workshop in October. I didn't want to be in the way of anybody else. But when I did, I wanted to do something different and unique. So not only, but kind of the goal of that workshop is that we hike and we go places that, you know, other groups maybe couldn't reach, or, you know, would be limited from getting to in some way. And so that brings us to unique locations that most visitors to this park don't get to see, and provides, hopefully, a unique experience for people. But, I even that, at the start of every workshop, I request of my attendees that they release themselves from that pressure of feeling that they need to produce images. Because, what I've seen time and time again is people becoming frustrated because they can't find something at a location that inspires them to make a photograph. And then that frustration, of course, leads to the feeling of failing, which is going to uninspire you even more. So, but if we go out into the field without the expectation of making successful images, we can avoid those negative thoughts that arise when we don't get the image we want, and maybe hold on to that inspiration, and then we can use that at the next location. And what I've found is most people are really open to that. They show up like, I'm at a photo workshop, I'm here to make images, and then here's this guy telling me to don't worry about it, don't worry about making images. But people seem pretty open to it, and it's at least. That's how I think when I photograph, and the way I see it is people are coming to learn from me, and that's the first thing I want to teach them is, just let go of that pressure. When inspiration hits, it'll hit.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to circle back on what we were talking about earlier about that moment where you were camping and you had that realization that I might quit photography because this is just not working. I found, at least for myself, through a little bit of introspection over the last 6 months, that we fall into this trap where we have it in our mind that if I check all these boxes and I do all of these things, I'm going to become successful as a photographer, or I'll be seen as successful as a photographer. And it's funny, right? Like, because you have a gallery, you run workshops, you live in an amazing place in the country at the footstep of a national park that's beautiful. And like most people would just be super jealous of that, right? Like, what are you talking about, man? Like you're living the photography dream, right? But what I found is that a lot of us suffer from this idea called a rival fallacy. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before, but it's basically the belief that if we attain a particular goal, it will lead to long-term happiness. And what I've found is that that's kind of it's a myth, right? Like happiness comes from other things. Obviously, that stuff helps a little bit in terms of like, oh, I set a goal for myself and I achieved it. But I think if we blend in happiness or expect happiness to come from attaining those things that we think are important, I think we're setting ourselves up for failure.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really easy to set us up for failure. It's to set ourselves up for failure. It's easy to fall into that way of thinking, and I think that certainly was a big struggle for me for a while to get out of that. And it's not an easy thing to do, to let go of goals or let go of expectations. It's even harder to ask someone else to do that.
Right. They look at you like, what, you want me to do what?
But like, again, for me, that's what it took. And, going back to, kind of bringing my family back into this, how to, divide work and play. So when I, early on in my career here, and I was mostly doing just these, private tours, and that was, including the year I was speaking of, 2021, 2022 especially, those summers and falls where I did so many of these private tours, and I was like burned out hard by the end of the year. And I was doing workshops too, but it became apparent that it was these private tours that were really burning me out. I mean, I would I'm like meeting clients an hour before sunrise. We're out for 4 hours. Then I go to the gallery. I work there all day. And then, maybe another client in the afternoon for 4 hours till sunset. And then I get to go home and, see my family. And you get 3 or 4 days like that in a row. And it's just, trying. And it's a similar schedule maybe to a workshop, but it just felt different. And but then I did a lot less. I did fewer private tours. I was, I did more just like group workshops, and that schedule felt a lot better to me. And we were even able, as a family, we were able to get away for a couple weeks early on in the summer, which I never thought we'd be able to do. Because of my schedule. But we took this trip, a road trip, up into Quebec, and keep in mind our daughter was 2 months old at the time. We put everybody in the car on a 2-week long road trip. That's insane.
I was gonna say that doesn't sound awesome.
It was amazing. It was amazing. It was like, so, I had, through life, this like short list of like truly amazing experiences, life-changing experiences. There was like a 2-week trip my wife and I did in Alaska, that's on that list. And, that it was like a true adventure, there was danger around every turn. But this trip ended up on that list. And, I'd never experienced anything like it, like being that gone that long, being on the road that long with kids, I'd been gone that long. I'd been on the road that long, but never with kids. So that was really incredible. And I was also, out of the 2 weeks that we were up there, 3 of those days were photography days. And it felt really good. There is one spot set aside when we get here. This is, I'm doing photography, and the rest of the time it's just a family trip. And it was, also a scouting trip for a future workshop. So I had found now another way to spend time with family while also doing work, right? So taking this scouting trip and turning it into a family vacation, and kind of, 2 birds with 1 stone. And that worked out really well. And so I see more of that in the future now, because it's that I might have where I feel like I should be working, and ease the stress of, also, spending too much time away from family.
I just wanted to add on.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience with you back in, I want to say 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. My wife and I did a trip with 2 of our friends to Kauai. And of course, I brought all my camera gear with me and had to photograph all these spots at sunrise and sunset. And like, it was becoming apparent very quickly that I was just becoming a nuisance to the group, right? Like, they're like, you want to stay here until when? Like, really? And of course, but I was in this place I'd never been before, and I was so excited to photograph it. And that was a really important trip for me, because I recognized that my desires to photograph a place were kind of getting in the way of having an experience with my family. And so from then on, I kind of intentionally tried to separate the two a little bit. So like if my wife and son and I would do a trip together somewhere, I might bring my camera and a lens or two, but I wasn't like, I wasn't trying to force like, oh, we have to go to these 7+ spots. I was more just like, if I see something cool while we're there, great, I'll get a photograph. And I found, of course, you still get awesome photographs. Yeah. But you're taking away all of that pressure on yourself and all of that tension with the family. And there's maybe like a couple of, like if you go for 7 days, let's say, I might carve out a day and a half of that for something, like maybe get up before everybody else and go photograph something on the beach while everyone's sleeping, kind of a thing, so that I'm not disrupting the schedule or whatever. So I find it's helpful to kind of have those realizations and then just try to, put the importance on having those experiences with your family.
I think it's necessary for people like us who do what we do.
Right.
I think it makes for a better experience. We were just in Florida for a week, and there was the beach was just like right across the road from where we were staying. So in the mornings, the baby would wake us up, and like, this was the first time I'd ever done this. When it came time to pack camera gear, I put the camera and one lens in the bag, no tripod, nothing else. Just a 100 to 400 zoom. And so in the mornings, I'd go up, I'd walk across the street, and I'd walk up the beach for an hour and photograph birds along the shore. And then by the time I got back to our little section of beach, there they were. There's my family, like, out on the beach. The kids got the sand toys out, and it's time to hang out. And that was the best part of the morning, as it turned out, was that anticipation. Like, I'm having this great time making photographs, but then I knew that then we'd have the whole day ahead of us. So that's great, on a family trip, and for people like us who, our whole lives otherwise are photography. So how do you, people who don't have that, who maybe have day jobs and only get to do photography on vacations or on workshops or on weekends, how do they get to that point? How do you get them there?
Well, and back then when I started doing that, I mean, I wasn't doing photography full time. I had a full-time job, and I just recognized that the photography was kind of getting in the way of having a good experience with my family. And so I just recognized it was important to kind of carve the two things out separate, and I was okay with it, right? Like, yeah, maybe I'm going to get 50% less photos in or whatever, but totally worth it to have those memories with your family, and then also not create that tension where it's like you're dominating the trip with your photography needs or whatever. So, and it's funny, I remember the conversation I had with David Duchemin about this. He was talking about, people ask him all the time, if I'm going to Venice, what should I do? Like, where should I go? And he's like, don't bring your camera, go to the most amazing restaurants, just walk around, use your cell phone. Like, don't worry about photography. Like, you're gonna have a much better experience, especially if you're with your family, right? So it's hard for us as photographers though to separate the two. So I would encourage people to try to separate them as much as they can, because it can get messy really fast.
Yeah. I don't listen to it. We're like practically telling people not to do photography anymore. Just quit. Just go hang out with your family. You don't need to make photographs. No, I mean, that's obviously that's an important part of our lives. So I get it. I understand how people will, feel that need, I did for so long. I mean, I still do.
Oh, for sure.
It builds and builds. I'll go days where I don't even need to think about photography, but then I'll start getting that itch and I'll have to go out. And that's when I go out. And having that freedom, that peace of mind, and freedom of no expectations, no matter what's going on outside, I can go out and find something usually that inspires me to photograph.
All right, well, maybe this is a good segue to talk about another topic that I wanted to discuss with you. I know that you're super well known for kind of being the Acadia National Park guy, right? Like, where you want to do a workshop in Acadia? Like, you should check out John, right? So what do you think some of the pros and cons are relating to being kind of known for a niche location like Acadia?
It's a great question. I mean, I think, the pros are pretty obvious. Well, maybe not. But for one, business comes to me. I can just kind of linger here and wait for summer to start, and the people will come. Acadia is within a day's drive of some massive population centers. It gets millions of visitors in the summer, 3, 4, 5 million people, depending on the year, come through the park. So, that part of it is easy. And my kind of the main hub here is Bar Harbor, which is on the other side of the island from me. I say island. At low tide, it's barely an island, but it is technically an island. It's quite large. But I'm in Southwest Harbor. That's where my gallery is. So the amount of people that visit Southwest Harbor is much lower than Bar Harbor. but you can still open a business like a photo gallery and have it be successful, even though you're in a tiny little town. So yeah, all that's pretty easy. I think the biggest pro for me, of course, which I mentioned earlier, is I can go anywhere in Acadia. And this is whether I'm out with somebody or on my own. I can go anywhere in the park and be home for dinner. So that's amazing. As far as national parks go, it's kind of funny. As far as national parks go, that's almost a pro and con. Right? You can go anywhere in the park and be home in time for dinner, but that means, there aren't any backcountry opportunities. Kind of, not really. See, I'm going to go on a tangent here. Acadia is like all parceled out, right? Mount Desert Island, we have about half the island is Acadia National Park, and this is the main section of it. And then there's other sections like Scoodic Peninsula and some of the outer islands here. And then there's a place called Isle of Ho, which is another island, much smaller than this one. And about half of that island is Acadia National Park as well. And it's not hard to get to, but certainly harder than here. You can't take your car. There's a almost daily mailboat or passenger ferry that goes out there, and there is a very small campground with 5 lean-tos that is operated by the national park, and the boat will drop you off right there. There's a small little town on the island, little village where the boat drops off, but also right at the campground. And the campground, it's kind of like backcountry camping. It's a lean-to. You need to bring everything. You need to carry everything you're going to have on your back. But from the dock to the campsite, to the farthest campsite is maybe 100 yards. So you also have your hands free to carry coolers of beer and like board games, if it's going to be rainy or something. But super rugged out there. It feels like you're in the backcountry. But anyway, cons of being related to one location. There's probably some really obvious ones. I have a hard time thinking of any. I love it here. I love what I do. I don't feel the need to be worldwide photographer. And besides, I fill my workshops outside of Acadia. That's not a struggle for me. And so I think because of that, I don't feel like I'm tied to this place or overly tied to this place. I try to conceive of ideas for workshops that are unique, not just to give myself an edge, but those ideas come from experiences that I have, and I want to share those with other people. And I think having unique offerings outside of Acadia, provide that for me. So, I think without those, maybe I'd have a different answer. Maybe I would feel a little stuck to Acadia, but I don't. The future I have decided on for myself is expanding outside of Acadia more because, I think in the long run, that'll allow me for a better experience at home. If I'm less busy here, I think to be less busy here means that I have to travel more and offer more workshops outside of Acadia, which sounds backwards a little bit, right? I have to travel and be away from home so I can be at home more, but I do believe that is how this is going to work for me. So, and I see that as a pro, to living here. I do have this place to fall back on, and not even fall back on, but to use as a home base and come back to.
Do you ever get tired of photographing the same locations in Acadia?
No,
never. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I can always find something new. I think, years ago, I would say, maybe I'll get bored of this location, so I just start going to a different one until I'm bored of that one, and then maybe I'll go back to the first one. But anymore, I can always find something new and unique to myself, no matter where I go. And I think, that comes from, what we talked a lot about is just, not having that pressure to constantly be out making images. Every time I go out now, it feels fresh.
Well, I had one more topic I wanted to talk to you about, which is this idea of artist versus photographer, but I think we can save that as a bonus episode for our Patreon supporters. So I guess last two questions I have for you. I know we talked a little bit already about the whole idea of ensuring your clients have a great experience by helping them release expectations and things of that nature. What are maybe a couple other things that you do in order to ensure that people have a great experience on a workshop?
Food. Lots of food.
No, that's funny, right? Because I just did Death Valley, and if it was me on my own, I would have just been photographing a couple of these locations all day long and just ate granola bars or something, because I was like, this is just so incredible. But I know from experience that if you don't give people ample opportunities to eat, they get grumpy, and so it's a tough balance.
Yeah, no, it's a real answer. And that was, I attended two workshops many, many years ago when I was first kind of getting started and gaining interest in this. One with Franz Lanting out in around Monterey Bay in California, and then the following year with a guy named Jason Bradley, who I'd met. He was assisting Franz, and then the following year I took a workshop just with Jason. And one of the takeaways, like as an attendee for both of those workshops, I was like, hey, they fed us really good. Like, I still remember the food. So that was something that I always included in mine. I make sure we have lots of snacks, sometimes even feeding people meals, and absolutely, the meet and greet. The first time we meet each other is always sitting down for a meal around a table, usually at a restaurant. But I love this. In July, I do a workshop every year where we're here in Acadia, and then we go and we photograph puffins, off the shores of Maine. And again, I want these workshops to be an experience. So that workshop, the meet and greet, is in my backyard, and we have a big lobster bake. So I get a whole bunch of lobsters, and we cook them up right there once everybody arrives, and everybody gets a little tutorial about how to break the lobster apart and get into all the goodies.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So yeah, food, but also I think, unique experiences, showing people things that they don't get to see or that maybe other people don't offer. And, but I think most of all, just, providing a positive experience requires having a positive attitude. I think that's everything, showing patience, positivity. I don't think you could do this without those qualities.
Totally agree. All right, John, last question. Who are a couple of people that you recommend our listeners learn more about, or who we should maybe have on this podcast?
So, I've got to represent the East Side here. So that was that was a big goal of mine, was to, kind of come up with a list of people that on this side of the country. Nothing against the West Side, but got to, represent our own. So, in thinking about Maine, so there's a woman, Greta Ribas, who is a photojournalist here in Maine. And she is so good at capturing like the essence of a place, the character that a place has. And I'm absolutely in love with her work. So I'd love to hear more from her. And she actually, I think today or tomorrow, is releasing a book. So she traveled the world and photographed hot springs all over the world, and then put this book together.
Nice.
Yeah. Super cool. So Greta, there's a photographer here in Maine by the name of Chris Bennett. So Chris is, in the summers, I think primarily a wedding photographer, but he's also an avid adventure and outdoor seeker. Well, adventure seeker, but outdoor photographer, specifically like outdoor fitness photography. So a lot of his photography revolves around like trail running and biking and that sort of thing. And he does all these crazy bike trips, like during the winter, he'll go, I think this past winter, did a bike trip, followed a bike route in, was it the Congo?
Oh, wow.
Like muddy roads and stuff. And he photographs the whole thing. And I think actually does okay with like stock photography sales, because he's photographing these really unique, adventures. He always brings a couple people with him to photograph along the way. So that could be really interesting.
Yeah, that's way different.
Yeah. And he would have, some interesting stories to tell. In 2020, he was going to ride his bike across the country from California, I believe, back to Maine to raise awareness for suicide prevention, and had to cut that trip short, unfortunately, for a very admirable cause, but did it again, went back and started all over again and completed that. So he'd certainly have some stories to tell.
Wow.
And then I would love to hear I'd love to hear you interview Max Stone. Have you had him on? I know you've had a lot of people on.
I've exchanged a few emails with him, and
okay.
I think he put out a photograph this last year that has just stuck in my mind. I can't even describe it. It's like it's like a reflection of the moon.
Yeah, it's not the moon,
water.
though.
I know, but it's just a mind-blowing photograph.
Yeah.
I'll put a link to it in the show notes. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, most of his work, it sounds like, in the Everglades. And the Everglades, it's not just a national park. The Everglades extend far beyond the boundaries of that park. But he spends a lot of time in the swamp and gets some very unique perspectives. Yeah, I'm fascinated with his work.
He does a lot of conservation photography as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, John, this has been awesome.
It has. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me on here.
Of course.
I'm glad we finally got to do it.
And we'll have a little bit of fun on the bonus episode as well.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Well, thank you to John for the fabulous conversation and for all of your authenticity. I loved it. I hope listeners might rethink their approaches to photography thanks to your wisdom. Well, John wanted me to extend a discount to our listeners for his private Acadia National Park workshops. You can get 10% off the workshops by using the code JustFStopIt. Clever. If that's of interest to you, I've put a link to that in the show notes, as well as everything else that we discussed. Please do consider supporting John on this journey. Speaking of supporting people on their journey, I'd be very grateful if you help to keep this podcast going by supporting it on Patreon. I do not have ads nor major sponsors for this show, so having you help out with even $5 a month is greatly appreciated. Thank you for keeping the dream alive. Just head over to patreon.com/fstopandlisten to learn more. Thanks in advance. Okay, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.